Hi guys, Olive here today to talk to you about the books I read in March 2020. Per usual, I'm going to start off by talking about all those books that I have not previously discussed in depth elsewhere, beginning with the two books I read for March Mystery Madness. The first of those two was Magpie Murders by Anthony Horowitz. This has been a really hyped mystery ever since it first came out in 2017. It is an extremely bookish mystery inside a mystery that starts off with the manuscript of what will be the final book in a much beloved cozy mystery series. A woman who works for the publisher of these mystery books is reading the manuscript along with us. But when that manuscript abruptly cuts off, she herself starts to do some digging into a mystery surrounding the author. This was so fantastic. I was sucked in almost immediately. It is so clever and ingeniously crafted. I really loved all the bookish references in here to both the book industry and then to other mystery authors. I am assuming that I will appreciate those even more after I have dug into Agatha Christie's back catalog, but I highly recommend this one if it sounds interesting. And if you've already read it, allow me to let you know that there is a sequel to this book coming out in August called Moonflower Murders. Now, perhaps it was because I read my second March Mystery Madness selection after I read Magpie Murders, which was a 5-star read for me. Or perhaps it was because, as several of you warned me, this series starts off very slowly. But I really didn't like Still Life by Louise Penny. In this book, an older woman is found dead in a quiet, remote Canadian town. The victim was an artist who, up until recently, had never shown her art, making everyone question whether or not her art may have had something to do with it. There's also every possibility that this was just a hunting accident. As advertised, this book does have a really good small town feel to it. But I don't know, I thought it was really slow and I really didn't like how everything came together at the end. I thought it was pretty absurd. I know several of you let me know in my comment section that this series takes a few books to hit its stride, and a few other people told me that it's worth reading these books in order. But I'm honestly not sure if I have the patience for that. As I mentioned in my March TBR video, my husband read and loved the fourth book in this series. And ever since he finished it, he's been pestering me to read it because he thinks I'm going to love it as well. So at this point, I'm considering skipping the second and third books in this series if they're not all that great and just moving on to the fourth one that I want to read and that he wants me to read. If you've read this series, let me know what you think of that plan down in the comments. Much obliged. I also participated in 2 different buddy reads this month. The first one I did with Emma from A Cup of Books. Together we read Spook by Mary Roach. This is Mary Roach's look at the science, if there is any, behind the afterlife and the paranormal. In the book, she travels with scientists in India who are investigating claims of reincarnation. She explains what methods would have been used by phony mediums who were attempting to deceive their customers. She talks about near-death experiences. And she also talks about what we scientifically might be feeling when we sense a presence in the room. Like I end up feeling with most Mary Roach books, I thought it was just okay. I gave it 3 stars. It's probably more like a 2.5 or 2.75. I just really don't get the point of most of her books, but I do think that's kind of a symptom of my personality. Like, I'm not really a dabbler. Either I do something or I don't. So when there's a book that's the equivalent of dabbling, it doesn't go too deep into anything and it doesn't make a grander point, I don't really know why you would feel compelled to write it or expect anyone else to read it. I do think she gave the reincarnation idea a fair shake when she was considering that, but then, admittedly so, she was highly skeptical about all of the other topics. I liked her discussion of electromagnetism. I thought that was very interesting, but really this book was just kind of the equivalent of lukewarm water. It just didn't do anything for me. I think I have the patience for one more Mary Roach book before I finally swing the gavel and decide that she's just not for me. I liked the other book I buddy read a whole lot more, which is unsurprising considering it was a 5-star nonfiction prediction. That book was Ghosts of the Tsunami by Richard Lloyd Perry. I read this one with Kazen from Always Doing. This is a book about the devastating 2011 Japanese earthquake and resultant tsunami that struck a specific school building particularly hard when, as Kazen let me know during our buddy read, schools are often the safest place you can be in Japan during a natural disaster. I would say that this book is an investigation of what happened at that school first, and a discussion about the tsunami in general second. It's an extremely haunting book, both in the content and the language he uses to describe it. And as much as you can like one of these books, I really did enjoy it, but it ended up being a 4-star read instead of a 5-star read for me because I found the organization really confusing. The author decided to sandwich the discussion about what happened during the tsunami itself in between 2 sections talking about what happened at the school, when I think that should have been what started out this book. Wouldn't you want your audience to first understand what happened during the tsunami and get a picture in their head of what that must have been like for the people inside of the school before actually talking about the events at the school? I don't know if it was him making an assumption that everyone already knows everything about the Japanese tsunami. I personally did not. I felt that he should have led with that information so that I could fully understand the magnitude of what happened to the people in that school. I thought originally that he might have had a reason for structuring it this way, and that might become apparent by the time I reached the book's end. But after I finished the book, I still didn't really understand why he made that choice. So not quite a 5-star read, but still extremely moving and heartbreaking. A romance I picked up off of NetGalley this month is called The Earl Not Taken by A.S. Fenichel. In this book, 4 girls had previously become friends at finishing school because they believed that they didn't fit in. After they leave school, one of the 4 girls, Aurora, gets married off to an abusive husband. But after that brute dies, the 4 of them vow that they will not allow themselves to be married off to a complete stranger, so as to hopefully avoid a situation that Aurora had previously dealt with. But then, of course, one of them is set up with a mystery man, and the de facto leader of the group, Poppy, decides to look into this guy to see if he's a safe match for her friend. She decides to team up with Aurora's older brother to do so. This is made interesting because Aurora's brother and Poppy have had a contentious relationship for years, but are also attracted to each other. Let me start off by saying that I did like a lot about this. I thought it was a lot of fun, and it was definitely a page-turner, but I thought the premise was so misleading. About 25% of this book, if that, is Poppy actually looking into this potential groom's past. The vast majority of this book was the push and pull routine between Aurora's older brother and Poppy, and so much of it was unrealistic considering this is supposed to be a period romance. Sure, Jan. I'll consider reading the next book in the series, but according to a preview I read of it at the end of this ebook that I read, it very much looks like it's going to be the exact same book, only with new characters. It has pretty much the exact same language that this book had, so I don't know. We'll see. At the beginning of the month of March, before any of the lockdowns happened, I traveled to Philadelphia to visit with some friends. And on my way to that end of the state, I listened to the audiobook of Dr. Mooters' Marvels by Kristen O'Keefe Aptowitz ahead of a visit to the Mooter Museum. This is a biography of Thomas Dent Mooter, who was an innovative surgeon in mid-19th century Philadelphia. He had a tragedy-stricken early life, but went on to build a career for himself and become extremely well-respected in his field. As I suspected it would be, I thought this book was extremely similar to The Butchering Art by Lindsay Fitzharris, but with far less of the ick factor. I thought The Butchering Art was extremely gruesome in its descriptions. And also, not that Joseph Lister, who was the star of The Butchering Art, not that he was a bad man, but Thomas Dent Mooter was an amazing one. He was so kind and deserving of esteem. He was so good at what he did. He treated his patients with respect, and he did so much good. And then to get to visit the museum after reading this book, I thought it was a really cool experience. I would recommend that you follow my lead and go visit the Mooter Museum when you're in Philadelphia, but everything's closed right now. Ironically enough, when we were there, there was an exhibit on the Spanish flu. Foreshadowing. But then, funnily enough, right at the end of the month, I picked up an additional book that referenced the Mooter Museum quite a few different times. That book was called Skeleton Keys by Riley Black. Please note that the author's previous name is the one that appears on the cover. This is a book all about bone. How it first evolved, its structure, how we use it, what an evolutionary marvel it is, and what stories it can tell long after we're gone. I don't have a ton to say about this book. I did really enjoy it, but I found that it ended up being far more of an anthropological or archaeological study of bone than it was a biological study of bone, which is fine. I just personally would have liked a little bit more balance between science and culture. I'm still obsessed with this cover though. I very much feel that this was the month of the 3-star rating because Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng was pretty much the same deal. I thought it was compelling enough that I got through the book, but I didn't really see that there was anything special about it. In case you didn't know, in this book, an artist and her daughter move to the aggressively suburban neighborhood of Shaker Heights, Ohio, and live in the upper floor of a house that is owned by a very prim and proper journalist who is also a mother of 4. Her children and the daughter of this artist become friendly, there's some domestic drama, and there's also a shakeup in the town when a mother who gave up her child wants her back. I thought the story was okay. I didn't find it to be all that exciting, and honestly most of it just struck me as highly unrealistic. I don't know how that waspy mom hasn't found herself in cuffs considering the liberties that she takes with people. There was also absolutely no nuance or subtlety to this book. Everything the author wanted you to think and feel was directly written on the page. There was absolutely no room for interpretation, and I really dislike when books are so on the nose like that. I did just recently start watching the Hulu series, so we'll see how that goes. And then another 3-star rating went to The Map Thief by Michael Blanding, all about a respected map dealer who was caught stealing maps from Yale's University Library, only to discover he had been doing so for a while. More so than other of these light true crime books that I've been inhaling recently, I thought the side information that the author provided that was related back to the crime was particularly relevant and interesting in this book. That's because the majority of the side information he was providing was either about map collecting or about the maps themselves. What the map was, who did it, how rare it was, why it was important, things like that. I found it really enriched the story. If you like maps or even just have a vague interest in them, I think you'll find this book to be really enjoyable. I only gave it 3 stars because the map thief himself is pretty boring. He's just a normal guy with bad business sense, so there are no fireworks here. Approaching the end of this video, I would now like to just briefly mention the 3 books that I have discussed elsewhere. The first of those is my favorite book of the month. That's Writers and Lovers by Lily King. I thought this was absolutely incredible, although admittedly light on plot. If you liked Euphoria and how intentionally written that was, I think you will also really enjoy this story of a writer in her early 30s attempting to finish her first novel while wading through a pool of grief. If you are at all interested in this book, I wrote a rave review of it for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and I will leave a link to that review in the description box below. I also wrote about another March release, Spirit Run by Noe Alvarez, which is a memoir of a young man born to Mexican immigrant parents who decides to participate in a continent-long run in order to reconnect to the land. I thought some passages in this book were extremely powerful, especially within the conversation about how he wished to redefine the act of running when it comes to immigrant populations. But ultimately, I do feel like this one fell a little bit short. If you would like to hear why, I will leave a link to the review I did for Open Letters down in the description box below. And then the last book I'd like to mention in this video is one that got its own video here on this channel. During the month of March, I read A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson, which is his memoir of walking the Appalachian Trail. This book includes information about the trail itself, plenty of anecdotes, and Bryson's trademarked humor. After I finished reading this book, I moved on to watch the 2015 movie adaptation starring Robert Redford and Nick Nolte. I made a whole video talking about both the book and the movie and comparing them, and I will leave a link to that video down in the description box below and up in the cards in case you'd like to see it. So those are all the books that I read during the month of March. I would love to hear from you if you've read any of these books, if you've heard of any of these books, or if you're now interested in reading them after hearing me discuss them. You can put that or any other comments or questions you may have down in the comment section below. But if you'd prefer to find me somewhere other than YouTube, I am on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles will be in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.